of Pyathlon. Today we'll be using the same notebook from the previous two videos and we'll be discussing how you can break your code into pieces and why you should do so. So first we'll start off with the why. The reason why you want to break your code into multiple functions, even if you can leave everything in one function and it will run because it'll be syntactically fine, you would want to break it into multiple functions so that you have more control over what code you're running at what point. For example, the way this code is now, every time you run this function, you'll get new user input, you do a new validation, and you'll also run the logic to see if they're eligible for the discount every single time you run this function. Let's say you want to get some new user input, so you want to get a new age from your user, but you don't want to validate it or go through the logic to see if they can actually get the discount quite yet. So if your function is all in one block like this, you won't be able to have that level of flexibility. But if you were to break your functions into multiple parts, then you would actually be able to get the age, and then you can validate, and then you can get the logic. So in this video, we'll be talking about parameters and arguments, and we'll be implementing this into our code and breaking this code into multiple functions. So the first function we'll write will be the function that gets the user input. So we'll do get def, and we'll just say, we'll call this get age from user. And the parentheses, colon, and we have to indent. So here, what we're going to do is do age equals input. What is your age? And then we're going to return age. So we haven't talked about this line or the return statement yet, but what the return statement does is it gives the function a value that you can then use later in your program, or something that you can assign to a variable. And to show you exactly what it does, we'll define this function and we'll set the result of this function equal to a variable. So we'll say user underscore age equals get age from user. This won't work, and it'll make sense why it doesn't work in a second. So we'll run this function. It asks for the age, let's say 26. Hit enter. And now let's print user underscore age. What do you think it's going to be? Do you think it will be 26 or something else? It says none. So why did that happen? That happened because this function doesn't have a value. So Python just gives it a value of none. It's a none type. If you were to check the type of that, it would say none type. So let's take this back to print. And in order to make our functions, to give them the ability to retain a value, we have to use this return statement. So we'll add return age. And return just says whatever comes after this will be the value of the function when we run it and assign it to a variable. And age is what's going to actually be returned. So every time you change a function, you have to rerun that code cell to redefine your function. So we've redefined our function. We'll get a new age. We'll do 28 this time. Enter, and print user age and 28. So what the return statement does is it allows us to run a function and then retain the value that we can use later in our program. Alright, so we can get rid of this print statement here. Now the second thing our code does is it validates the input. So let's do that in another function. We'll say def is user input valid. And what we want to do is to be able to refer to the output of this get age from user function and validate that and see if it's numeric. When I talk about validation, I'm seeing if the value is numeric. And we want to be able to refer to the output of a function, and we want to be able to run this function and check different values. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add a parameter. Now, a parameter is a piece of information you can pass into a function that you can then manipulate inside of that function. So let's think about this in mathematical terms. A mathematical function has an input and it has an output. So these parameters, they're the input to our function, and what's after this return keyword is the output of our function. So this function doesn't have input because it gets the input from the user and then it outputs what we got from the user. But this function here will have both input and output. So For here, we'll just say age. And age will be the input to our function. We don't need to specify a type for age or anything. Python is smart enough where we don't have to specify a type or anything here. And now age, we can use this just like we would use any other variable inside of this function. And this is also a good time to talk about scope. When you define a variable, that variable has a scope. And this parameter also has a scope. And the scope of this parameter will be this function. So if I were to, let's just say we'll print age for now. I can only use age inside of this function because that's the scope of that parameter. If I were to do print age here, I would get an error saying age is not defined, and that's because we're outside of the scope. And scope, an easy way to figure out the scope is to look at the parentheses. So we have age here. I said parentheses, I meant colon. So we have age here, then we have a colon. So everything that's indented from this colon right here is within the scope of this parameter. And once we go out, so if I were to do print age here, then I'll get the same error we just saw. Alright, so we want to see if this input is valid or not. So we can actually just copy this line from here. And we can say if age is numeric, then return true. Else, return false. Okay, so there's several things I want to talk about here. First, remember, this is numeric function returns a Boolean value. So this is either going to be true or false. And so if it's true, we're saying if true matches true, return true. Else, return false. So we don't need this matches true here because it's redundant. Because this will evaluate the if true or if false already. But also, if is numeric returns true, then we want our function to return true. If is numeric returns false, we want our function to return false. So this whole if else is actually redundant because we can just directly do return age that is numeric. And let's see how that works. So I'll just copy this. We already have our user input in this variable user age here. So we'll just pass that in as the input, and then this function will return either true or false. And it returns true because it was 28, which is valid input. It's entirely numeric. Alright, so we'll delete that cell. And the last thing we wanted to do is implement this logic here, where we actually see if they're eligible for the discount. So we can say def is eligible for discount. And once again, we'll have age passed in to see if they're eligible for discount. And I would just pasted the code from the first function in, and I have to re-indent that. And then we can just run that, and let's test this out. We can say is eligible for discount, user underscore age. You're not eligible for the discount because age is 28 at this point. So we can actually bring all of this together. So for this discount checker, let's make this function better by using our other functions. So instead of using the input function, we can use our get age from user. And then here, we don't need to say if age.numeric matches true. We can just copy this right here and paste it and say if user input valid with age, then validate. And we can also delete this entire block and replace it with is eligible for discount. It's complete, and we run that. That just defines it. So let's call discount underscore checker again. And this function does multiple things, but it does multiple things by calling our earlier defined functions. So this works a lot better now because now this code is much easier to read because we have our code broken out into multiple functions as opposed to having everything in one function. And if we only wanted to get the age from the user, then we can just call this function here. Or if we just wanted to validate some input, we can do it here. We're not forced to do everything in one step like we were the way the function was defined here. Alright, so let's input 71 for our age. Hit enter. It says you're eligible for the discount, and this code is working fine. So thank you for watching this video with us. We just want you to remember that functions are extremely important. They're extremely flexible and they're extremely powerful, and they're foundational to understanding any programming language. And so we're glad that you watched this video and made it to the end, and we hope you join us in our next video. Thanks for watching.